So as we begin this Lenten journey, this 40-day journey that takes us to the cross and the empty tomb, the first passage that we are going to go to is the passage where Jesus extends that invitation. That he shows us that the journey to the cross is not just for him alone, but he invites everyone who is following him to take up their cross and follow him. Which, if you dive beneath the surface, you recognize is one of the most provocative and powerful and challenging ideas that you could ever come across. And so, friends, we are in Matthew chapter 16. If you're new to the Bible, Matthew is the first gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We are in chapter 16, and friends, the grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of the Lord stands forever. And I invite you to stand for the reading of Scripture today. Matthew 16, verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said. This shall never happen to you. And Jesus turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, and you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. And then Jesus said to his disciples, Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory and with his angels, and he will reward each person according to what they have done. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Go ahead and have a seat. So to understand this passage, you need to understand the one that was right before it. Peter has just had a mountaintop experience with Jesus, where Jesus takes all of the disciples to Caesarea Philippi. For those of you who were here last week, we went into this passage, and Jesus turned to his disciples and he said, Who do you say that I am? Here's your moment, your statement of faith. What do you think in this moment, with all of the baggage that you have, with all of the mental capacity that you have, all the things that you have learned, all the things that you don't know? In this moment, who am I to you? And it was Peter that stepped up. Peter said, You are the Christ, the Son of the living God, who has come into the world. And Jesus said, You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will never overcome it. And it was in that moment that Peter kind of looked around and he's like, I think I just moved to 1A on this list here, guys. I think I'm the clear second in command to Jesus. And when Jesus comes into his kingdom and he gets crowned king in Jerusalem, I think we know who VP is on this one. I think I'll be in the Oval Office right with him as the second in command. For Peter, this was the height for him, okay? But one of the things that I really appreciate about Peter is that he's just like us. He has these moments of clarity and these moments of confusion. He has these moments where he really gets it and he's filled with faith, and he has these moments where he's filled with doubt. He has these incredible triumphs, he has all of these failures, and he has everything in between. It's like every day is different with Peter. Always an adventure with Peter. And so Peter has this experience where he has faith and clarity, says to Jesus, You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And now here we are in the very next passage. It's like they are just starting to set out and walk back from Caesarea Philippi. And verse 21 marks a turning point. So the Gospel of Matthew is 28 chapters. Chapter 16, verse 21 is a major turning point because it's the first time in the Gospel of Matthew that Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to die on the cross and be raised again. Up until now, there's been this momentum, this excitement to the movement. And in the disciples' mind, this is heading towards Jerusalem where he's going to take the throne and be crowned the king of Israel. That, in their mind, is what the Messiah is called to do. A historic, political, economic kingdom. That's what they want. That's what they expect. And Jesus has been doing these miracles. He's been doing this incredible teaching. He's feeding 5,000. Crowds are coming. They're the biggest crowds any rabbi has ever drawn. And they're excited. The momentum is turning, and we're heading to not just an inauguration, but a coronation. And so here comes the turn, the shift. Verse 21, and let's just walk through the passage. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to the disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to new life. He looks at the disciples and he says, "You've got the wrong crown. You're expecting a crown of gold, a crown that's kind of molded together from the crown that Herod had, maybe from anybody else that we conquer, and we melt their crowns down and mold them into my crown. That's what you're expecting. But you've got the wrong crown. You've got the wrong crown." So he says, "I'm going to die and be raised to new life." And this tripped something in Peter. And Peter's got a lot of confidence right now. He's stepped up boldly before to say, "You are the Christ of the Son of the living God." So he's kind of looking around being like, "I think I got it. I get it." So now he comes to Jesus, and I love this move. He takes Jesus aside. He's like, "Yeah, let's just do a little one-on-one since I'm kind of the VP now. Let's do a little one-on-one." And he began to rebuke Jesus. Can you imagine the guts? The courage of what it would take to not just talk to Jesus about it, but rebuke him. "Jesus, what are you doing? Don't you see we have the momentum? Don't you see where this is going? Why don't we get some white horses and ride into Jerusalem like the king that you are, and I'm in the cabinet?" I think in Peter's mind, he has a lot to gain from Jesus taking the crown, right? All of the disciples actually have a lot to gain, because if Jesus is the king, then they are the new cabinet. Maybe Andrew is like, "You know what I kind of want? Ambassador to Italy. Ambassador to Italy. Then I get to stay in one of those really nice villas right there in Rome. I go to all the dinners. We go to the galas. I get to talk about diplomacy, and it's Italy. So it's like super easy. This will be great." They have all of these positions in their mind of what's going to happen when Jesus comes into their kingdom, or comes into his kingdom. And Peter pulls Jesus aside and he's like, "Don't you get it? You're not supposed to die on a cross and be raised to new life. You're supposed to conquer the throne, kick Herod out, kick Caesar Augustus out, and let's pick up where we left off with David 1,000 years ago. That's what we want. That's what it's supposed to be." And Jesus turns to Peter, verse 23. "Get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, Satan." Okay, I've been called a lot of things. I've been called a lot of things in my life. And you've been called a lot of things. Thankfully, to this point, I've avoided Satan. I've avoided Satan. No one's called me that up to this point in my life. I don't know if anybody's ever called you that at this point. But for him to turn to Peter and say, "Get behind me, Satan," Peter just had his best day yesterday. And I think today it's probably rock bottom. He goes from being the rock on which Jesus is going to build his church to being Satan, a stumbling block. Get behind me. Now, there's a couple of different angles that you have to understand. I don't think he's just calling Peter Satan as if Peter is Satan. There's a couple of things going on. One, Jesus is calling back to Matthew chapter 4 with the temptation story, where Jesus is in the wilderness for how many days? 40. How long is Lent? 40. Okay, so Jesus is in the wilderness for 40 days being tempted by who? Satan. And one of the great temptations that Satan gives him is the last one, right? Where it's all kind of building to the third temptation. Where Satan takes him to Jerusalem, and they stand at the highest point of the temple, and he's like, you know this can all be yours. Or he takes him to the mountaintop, and he says, you know that this can all be yours, right? All of the kingdoms, all of the glory. You don't have to do this. You don't have to go to the cross. You don't have to die for everyone. You can just go straight to the throne and reign and be that king that everyone wants you to be. You could do that. That was the last of the temptations that Jesus experienced from Satan. So for Jesus to call Peter Satan, he's not just speaking it right to him, but it's kind of like he's saying this temptation is ongoing. It didn't just end in the desert, but it's something that continues on. And what he's trying to also tell his disciples is like, these temptations that we experience will never really stop as long as we live. Here's what I mean by that. There are moments where you feel like you've forgiven somebody and you've let it go. And then somebody tells you that they said something about you. And you're like, oh, I let it go, but I kind of didn't. Or you've forgiven that person, and then they give you that same look. You know that look. That look that they've been giving you for years. And it sends you right back to where you were, so it feels like. There are moments where we feel like we've forgiven. And then there are moments where we feel like we're drawn back in. And that temptation to resentment, to bitterness, is just one that we will continue to have to walk with as long as we live. That's just part of what it means to be a human being. The temptation to greed, where we try and grab onto as much as we can, and the temptation to not be generous with the resources that we have will just always be there. That temptation to get even, that temptation to resentment, that temptation to cynicism and bitterness is just something that we will always have to deal with. So when Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, it's his way of saying this temptation that I experienced back in the desert is ongoing and continuous. And it's part of the challenge of what it means to follow Jesus. So he's kind of setting the table for what he's about to say. So he says, get behind me, Satan, you are a stumbling block to me, and you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. And now here it comes. The most incredible and challenging invitation that you could ever receive. So then Jesus said to his disciples, so now it's not just Peter, but it's all of them. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. And I bet you could have heard a pin drop in that room. Here's why. For all of them standing there, they grew up around crosses. Jesus was not the first person to die on a cross, and he wasn't the last person to die on a cross. There are estimates with some of the battles between the Romans and the Jewish people around the first century that, for example, when the Romans conquered Sepphoris, which is a city not super far from Nazareth where Jesus grew up, it's about 4 miles. They said there might have been anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 people crucified on that day. The cross was a symbol of shock and awe. It was not just capital punishment, but it was about fear for people who had tried to stand up to the Empire of Rome when they were on the move. It was always good for you if you just bowed your knee. Said, okay, yeah, you can occupy us, you can have our land, you can take what you want, we'll just pacify you, that's fine. It always went fine for people like that. But if you fought for your land, if you fought for your people, then you might end up on something like this. Not just by the dozens, but by the thousands, lining the streets on the way into the city as a statement, do not mess with us. A lot of the people, and this is a historical theory, but it's grounded in a lot of evidence. There's a pretty good chance that of the 12 disciples, they knew people who had been crucified. They had grandparents who fought in these wars. They knew people who had been crucified. So for them, the symbol of the cross was one of fear, it was shame, it was trauma, it was pain. So when Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, I can't imagine the mix of feelings and response and memories and stories that these 12 people were carrying with them when Jesus gave this invitation. But here's his point. That symbol that you see there, that for centuries was filling people with fear and trauma and hatred and resentment and this desire to get even and become violent, that symbol right there, through the death of one person, through the death of Jesus, would become the universal symbol of love, of compassion, of forgiveness, and of hope. Do you understand the power of the cross? That it's not just that Jesus died for our sins and rose again, though that is really powerful. It's that Jesus took the symbol that meant victory, hatred, power, violence, death, shame, despair. He took a symbol that embodied all of those things and represented all of those things. And through the death of one person, Jesus of Nazareth, transformed that symbol into the symbol of forgiveness, hope, of love. It's the symbol that prisoners get tattooed on their bodies to be reminded that what they've done is not the center of who they are, that even though they might be spending the rest of their life in prison, they're forgiven, they're loved, they have hope, they can begin again even if they never set foot outside of this place. Why do they do this? Because the cross is the universal symbol of forgiveness. So Jesus' invitation for anyone who is following him is to deny themselves, to let go of those things that you are holding on to, whether it's building incredible wealth and security and trying to build your own kingdom in your life, to letting go of that being your goal, to letting go of forgiveness, or to letting go of resentment, of getting even, of greed, of indifference, and embracing everything that means. Compassion, selflessness, putting other people before yourself, an expansive view of love where Jesus dies for his enemies, forgive them, because they just don't know what they are doing. It's an invitation to not just witness what Jesus did, but participate in it with your own life. Friends, that's the invitation of Lent. And that's what we're doing. We're not just observers watching what Jesus did 2,000 years ago, but we are participants. We are participants in this incredible act of letting go of the things that hold us back from truly loving God and loving those around us. We are participants in following Jesus to the cross. We are participants in embracing this life that Jesus had. So he invites the disciples, and he says, you're looking for the wrong crown. Because you're going to see a crown, but it's going to be made of thorns. And instead of a throne, I'm going to the cross. But instead of building a temporary kingdom that might last 4 years, 8 years, or in the case of Caesar Augustus, 40 years, but then it was gone. Instead of building a kingdom like that, I'm going to build a kingdom that 2,000 years from now, people are going to be talking about in northern New Jersey. And that's a kingdom that will never end. Amen?